welcome. Thank you everybody for attending today's session, teaching the Hulk Tetris, understanding the impacts of trauma and the role of self-regulation when working with families involved in the child court system. So first of all, thank you Ryan and WACAP for having Katie, Bill, and myself here. Thank you everybody for coming today. This is probably my favorite training that I get to do. And partially because I get to do it with Katie Bell. So a couple housekeeping things before we get started. Please try to keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question. Otherwise it gets kind of distracting for us. Ryan will help keep a watchful eye on that as well. And this training is being recorded. And this is going to move pretty quick today. We have a lot of information that we packed into this time, and we really want to make sure we get to the end part because that's an opportunity for all of you folks to be able to actually practice some skills and a sampling of different skills that help build self-regulation capabilities. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. If we have time, we will get to them. If not, we may not have time to get to them to the end, or we will, I'm sure I can get them from Ryan after and respond after as well. So without further ado, my name is Laura Vogel. I am the Child Welfare Training and Court Improvement Specialist at the Administrative Office of the Courts. I have spent really my entire career working in the court system. I am originally from the Midwest, from Minnesota and North Dakota area, where I first started working in the court system on the criminal side, running a criminal domestic violence court. I worked in that area for a number of years in criminal domestic violence cases, high risk lethality teams, before moving to Washington in 2018. To be the Family Recovery Court Coordinator in Thurston County. So I ran their family treatment court for a number of years, and at the tail end helped with the implementation of their new Safe Babies court program. Well, actually the family treatment court job that I met my co-presenter, Ms. Katie Bell Karstens. And I'm gonna let Katie Bell introduce herself. But I do want to do a little introduction for her because Katie Bell has become an incredibly important person in my life and to this training. So Katie Bell was a graduate or is a graduate of the Family Treatment Court in Thurston County. She was one of my clients, actually one of my first clients that I ever had in Family Treatment Court. And because Katie Bell chose to stay in that program for much longer than she needed to. I got to know her very well in that capacity. And since her graduation and her continued involvement with the recovery community and in the work that we're going to be talking about today, that relationship has turned into a very special friendship. So I'm very excited to be able to present with Katie Bell. She brings an incredible amount of insight from the parent perspective into this training. So Katie Bell, I am going to let you introduce yourself, just on the final note of just saying for clarification that Katie Bell's case is closed. So that her case closed back in early 2021. So go ahead, Katie.
Hello, everyone. As Laura said, my name is Katie Bell Karstens. I have two kids. My son is named August, he's 13, and my daughter is Dahlia, she is 10 now. And my son, so I have a really decades-long alcohol addiction. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I have over 2.5 years of sobriety now. February 11th of 2019 is my sober date. And it kind of, addiction took me to the places where it takes most people, where I lost pretty much everything. My son, way back when he, like I said, he's 13, but way back when he was just a tiny baby, I got my second and third DUI, and he went to live with his dad's family, where he still remains. He's a great kid. He has a great life, and we talk all the time. I don't see him as much as I'd like to, of course, but and then Dahlia, my daughter, is the one that I was in family recovery court for. She was, she was 7.5. And I was just in a really downward spiral. And her dad ended up passing away basically as I was circling the drain. And he died of a heroin overdose, when she was just 7.5. And about less than a month later, my world imploded, and she went to foster care. And I just really needed a lot of help and support, and that's what I found in family recovery court. And just the people that cared a lot about us both really made a huge impact in our recovery, and we're doing really great now. So thank you, Laura, for having me.
And thank you, Katie Bell. And as Katie Bell mentioned, she had a lot of really wonderful people that helped her in her case. And one of those people that you're going to hear about is going to be the CASA that was on her case. I know that across the state, child advocates are referred to among a variety of things. You're going to hear me refer to it as child advocate. I may end up saying CASA, even though I know it is not CASA. I know we cannot say that. That is just what I am used to. I'm going to try not to. But you might hear that from Katie Bell as well, because that is what they were referred to when she was in the program as well. So I just wanted to clarify that before we got started. So today we are here to learn really about trauma and what trauma is in the context of how it is impacting somebody's current ability to function in the world, namely how it is impacting their current ability to parent safely. And why, because of that, self-regulation should really be the starting point and a primary focus at the beginning of a lot of these cases if we're looking for solid long-term success for families. And how we can work to help create trauma responsive experiences for families that help result in better outcomes. And finally, the whole end of this is going to be opportunities for all of you to try out a variety of different skills. Some of them you may like, some of them you may be like, this is not for me. We're going to try a wide sampling of different activities. So hopefully not only this training is educational for you, but also fun and provides you with some very practical, applicable skills that not only you can pass along to the families you work with to help improve their lives, but that you can practice in your everyday life to not only help improve your self-regulation capabilities, but to improve your overall wellness and life satisfaction. So when we are born, we have this brand new little brain that as we grow is imprinted and built and changed on the experiences that we have. And we know that there are these things called ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences, and that if we have 4 or more ACEs, we're much more significantly likely to experience all sorts of negative health outcomes. The question here is how? How do we get from this experience to actual outcomes? What is it that happens between the trauma of the actual event and these negative outcomes? What occurs? So we're going to talk about trauma today in terms of the cumulative physiological impact of the repeated or continuous activation of the stress response system. So essentially, we are talking about traumatic stress. We're talking about the physiological impact that trauma has on the body and the brain, and how that can potentially impact somebody into the long term. So first, let's talk about the stress response. So stress is not inherently bad. Stress is actually very essential for us to be able to function in life. Our stress response evolved for survival, and that is very important to remember. You're going to hear that word survival a lot in this presentation. Think of the antelope at the edge of the water hole. That stress response, when they hear something in the bushes, they're able to react really quickly and run away automatically without having to think about it. That has evolved as a means of survival. That has continued on all the way up to the evolution of human beings. The first part of the brain to develop was the brainstem. That is the most primitive part of the brain where the mechanisms for survival live. You'll hear people refer to this as like the lizard brain or the base brain or the primitive brain. In the, I should say in the brainstem, everything there's automatic. That is not within your conscious control. The next part to develop was the limbic brain, and that's where our emotions are housed. This is where we start to be able to form relationships and bonds and have that emotional understanding. The last part to develop is the neocortex, and that is where we have responsibility for higher level thinking, for executive decision making, for self-regulation, for impulse control. That is where we need to be able to access in order to have any kind of change or growth in behaviors. So that is where, what the most important part is, that is where we need people to be in order to be able to effectively work with them. So for a parent to be able to really understand what you're saying to them in terms of services, in terms of treatment, in terms of expectations or visitation, they need to be in that area of thinking. If they're not, they may look like they are understanding, they may nod along, they may say yes, but that information is not being retained. So that is going to also be an important theme as we go along. So kind of a 8th grade overview of the stress response system. We have 2 parts of our autonomic nervous system that control our stress response. We have our parasympathetic nervous system, and we have our sympathetic nervous system. Our sympathetic nervous system is responsible for activating our stress response. Our parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for deactivating it. Those 2 opposing systems have the common goal of trying to maintain balance in our system. Balance is healthy, balance is where we want to be. Not being within balance for any extended period of time either way is going to result in long-term harm to the body. So when we experience a stressor, whether it's something major, like being a victim of violent crime, being in a car accident, or whether it's your boss yelling at you at work, when we experience some kind of stressor, our sympathetic nervous system gets activated. That triggers our hypothalamus to signal to our pituitary gland in our brain and our adrenal medulla that sit on top of our kidney to release essentially a whole host of hormones and neurotransmitters. And I'm not going to go into in any more detail because it's not important. But it releases all these chemicals into your bloodstream in order to prepare your body to respond to that threat. So we have things like cortisol, dopamine, noradrenaline. This is when we Hulk out. This is when we go from Bruce Banner to the Hulk. So physically, when someone is in a stress response, and those chemicals are flooding through their system, you will see the body respond in automatic ways that look like it is preparing to address a threat that is a potential danger to survival. So we see things like field of vision narrows, auditory exclusion. That's where you can hear either really high or really low tones. These things come into play with how you interact with parents. So for example, auditory exclusion. When someone is in a stress response, if they're not able to hear those middle tones, the best thing you can do instead of talking faster and higher is to slow it down and talk at a lower tone. And I'm not going to go into like how each one of these, is adaptable to working with parents, but being aware of these when you are working with parents is that in of itself important. So you're able to recognize these signs when somebody is about to or is in a stress response. Essentially, a stress response means that anything that is not any bodily system that is not absolutely essential to our survival is shut down or greatly reduced. So like digestion. If your body's preparing to survive, it doesn't care if you're digesting. That is not important. That's a future thing. So that can stop. Circulation increases, bladder relaxes. your body, if you are preparing to fight or flee, you do not want to carry any extra weight on your body. So your body wants to release that. That is a natural response. Like I said before, I used to work a lot in domestic violence cases. One area that I worked in specifically was near fatal intimate partner strangulation cases. And one of the primary ways you could tell if a victim of a strangulation was very near death is if they urinated themselves or defecated themselves, because that was the body's kind of last response trying to survive. So for example, that was a implication of this that I used when I trained law enforcement in domestic violence cases. So what is also important to remember is that those hormones and neurotransmitters from the previous slides, they stay and circulate throughout the body between 8 to 30 hours. So I want you to imagine somebody living in a chronic high stress situation. That means essentially those chemicals are never out of their bloodstream. It's like children that grow up in really high stress environments. Their brains are developing in environments of increased stress hormones and neurotransmitters, and it is undeniable, and because we know through decades of research that has an impact on brain development. So let's talk about cognitively what happens during a stress response. We talked about what happens physically. Let's talk about what happens in the brain. Your body wants to survive, which means it wants to be able to react to a threat as quickly as possible, which means most of your brain function is going to come from the brainstem. Some from the limbic system. Your access to executive function is going to greatly decrease because somebody who is preparing to survive doesn't care if they can do algebra, doesn't care if they can work out an ethics problem, if they care about being able to survive. So when we function from the brainstem like this is what we call, and have these automatic responses to stimuli. This is when we see what's commonly referred to as trauma responses. So that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I think people are mostly familiar with the fight, flight, or freeze. Fawn is kind of a newer addition to that. And that has to do with more of a people-pleasing aspect. But these are kind of the 4 most common trauma responses. So what's important to remember here is if somebody is in this state, if somebody is the Hulk, we can try as much as we would like to try to get them to understand something or to learn or to change. It's not going to work. Not because it's their fault, not because of any kind of character flaw, because this is how the human body and the human brain works. So everybody has an individual threshold for stress. You can even think about this kind of in your personal life. You know people that handle stress better than other people. But some stress is good, right? When we have a stressor and our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system can work correctly, balance each other out, that's positive stress. Even when we have a stressor that puts us above threshold and we're able to bring ourselves back down and balance out, that's fine. That's tolerable stress. That's actually where a lot of satisfaction in life comes from. That's where risk taking comes from. I know Katie Bell and her daughter this year went to Fright Fest, one of the haunted cord maze things. And that is stressful. That induces a fight or flight response. But if you're able to bring it down because you know you're not in danger, you're able to regulate, that is a tolerable level of stress. That is healthy. The problem comes in when we have a stressor that puts us above threshold and we cannot bring ourselves back down. We do not have the internal skills to self-soothe, to self-regulate, to bring ourselves down below threshold. And this right here, what I was going to say is a very important point. Being above threshold is painful. It hurts. It is uncomfortable. And people suffer when they are above threshold, which means it is human nature to want to be below threshold. That is a human instinctual drive. Over time, your body responds to this by lowering your threshold for stress so that less stimuli is needed to activate it. That's your body's way of trying to protect itself. But ultimately, it means that it now takes less to put you above threshold, and you don't have the skills to bring it down. So what do you do? Katie Bell, before family treatment court and you were above threshold, what did you do to come down?
I would drink.
And when you felt guilty about drinking and that was stressful, what did you do?
I would drink more.
Yeah. This is where a lot of source of addiction comes from. Obviously not all, there's a lot of factors that go behind it. But people will find a way to get below threshold. If they can't do it themselves healthily, they will find an external way to do it. You want a real easy way to bring yourself below threshold? Heroin, opiates. That's one thing we don't talk about a lot with drugs. In this context, they work. In the immediate, they work. They fulfill the goal, that instant gratification. So if somebody is lacking those skills and looking for an easy fix, that is a very easy fix. We can also rely on things like other people to regulate ourselves. That's where some issues with codependency and toxic relationships come in, when we start relying on other people to regulate. I know, at least for me, when I get stressed out, I crave sugary and salty food, and just food in general. So everything that's connected to that, hypotension, increased pressure, diabetes, increased sleep or disrupted sleep habits. We know long-term interruptions in sleep is also very bad for the body and the brain. So some of those symbols should look familiar because they were on the ACEs page. This is where one of the main connections between the stress response and inability to self-regulate and the development of negative life outcomes comes in. So this is what negative toxic stress looks like. The body is not built to deal with this. The stress response evolved to escape the tiger at the water hole. It did not evolve to function in situations of long-term stress. That is not what it is built for. And over time, the body will start to break down. So when I say unresolved trauma, I'm saying that the traumatic experiences that somebody has experienced are negatively and detrimentally impacting their current ability to live and function and form relationships. I'm not saying that's because they didn't go to a certain type of therapy or didn't go on medication or didn't do this. I'm saying that it impacts them now. That impacts our architecture. That impacts us down to a cellular level. It impacts our immune system. It essentially touches every part of our body. I think many years from now, we are going to look back as, and you already hear people talk about it, stress is a killer. I highly recommend the book, Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers. It's where I first started learning about the stress response. Stress, and because it happens over time and it has so many overlapping symptoms with other risk factors, is maybe not taken as seriously as it is, but the human body is not equipped to handle stress like that, and it is bad for everyone. Whether you wear a black robe, a doctor's jacket, or jumpsuit, it is bad for everyone. Long-term outcomes, and this is just a very short list: high blood pressure, coronary heart disease, pretty much anything that could go wrong in your body is stress could impact. So there is a term. Dysautonomia is an umbrella term for the group of complex conditions that are caused by a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. And this is where my personal experience comes in. And why I started even being interested in this field or really know any of this at all. I was diagnosed in 2015 with one of the diagnoses you'll see under there with hyperPOTS, hyperadrenergic postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And I was diagnosed after about 8 years of being re-traumatized in the medical system and through a series of medical negligence, almost dying. So because these diseases are not well understood. A lot of people have not heard this term. And unfortunately, people who are diagnosed with a form of dysautonomia, a lot of them are not exactly able to get out to the house and leave and be out in society to have that level of awareness. So dysautonomia, I mean, it's a huge continuum, even within the diagnosis I have, which is very rare, but it's a wide continuum of being able to function. And where this comes in with me is when I was diagnosed back in 2018, I had quit law school. I was living with my parents. No, I'm sorry, back in 2015. I was not on a very good life path. I was not on a good life trajectory. I was very privileged that I had access to medical care and was able to be diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic. I have come in contact with many parents and children who have had signs of dysautonomia who are not gonna ever have that privilege. And once fully developed, forms of dysautonomia, because we don't exactly understand the mechanisms that go into it, they are not curable. There's no single course of treatment. They're very often just misdiagnosed. And it really comes down to symptom management. But these are developed over a period of time often. So some of the skills that we're gonna learn today to calm the nervous system and to activate that parasympathetic response, that is what really has been what has saved my life and allows me to be functional. I will always say that the medication stabilized me and got me to a point where I could live and see a path forward. But it was the mindfulness and those skills that have allowed me to actually live. If it wasn't for those, I know I wouldn't have ever moved to Washington. I'm sure I'd be in a very similar situation. And I say that not because I want people to feel bad for me or pity. That is not the goal here, but to understand that the impacts of this on people and children can be potentially lifelong and debilitating. So my POTS was directly diagnosed as being attributable to trauma that I experienced as a child. So you are going to see this come up in the system, and being aware that it exists and what it looks like is important for working with parents and with children. And we are going to talk about both some ways to help children and some ways to help the parents today. So I come from this view, more from a medical viewpoint and kind of my medical recovery of going from having to take like 18 pills a day to function to really getting into the mindfulness, self-regulation skills. And now I function very independently, own my own home. I have a job that I love, meaningful relationships, and I've cut my medication in about a third. So I can attest to the absolute power of the things we are going to talk about today, because I truly know that if I did not have them, I would not be here. So it has been a privilege to be able to work in the child welfare system, especially with parents like Katie Bell and her daughter, and be able to help bring some of that in. And to see not only the impact on people who've had trauma, but just how it also helps them connect with themselves and their recovery and with their children. So when we talk about unresolved trauma, the impacts on cognition, I'm just going to go over these very briefly. Because long-term time spent with our brains kind of basted in these stress hormones and chemicals and these stress responses, it can change our neural pathways and how our brains work. It changes our perception of things. Hyperarousal is when we require very little stimuli to set off that stress response. So we're overactive to stimuli in our environment. And this does affect somebody's ability to be able to accurately assess safety. So when we are talking about parenting, this is one of the issues that we see with parents. And we often attribute it to different things like substance abuse or mental illness. But some of the inabilities to parent and the parenting deficiencies are often due to some of the symptoms of trauma. Disassociation often looks like disorganized attachments, where a parent will be both the source of fear and also the solution for the fear or anxiety or distrust. So the child never really feels safe. And growing up in that kind of environment, not having those secure attachments really impacts somebody's ability to be able to connect with other people. What we'll often see here is difficulty in somebody's ability to assess the risk of danger in other people. And then we have avoidance. Avoidance is the cognitive desire and reluctance and just will not deal with the traumatic intrusive memories or triggers. So there is some kind of numbing, whether that is through alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, some other kind of means, or emotional numbing, where it's kind of this detachment from being able to fully experience emotions on the human spectrum. These kind of impacts on cognition short circuit the brain's ability to fully heal from trauma. So if you're working with a parent who is really struggling and you really cannot get them to go to treatment, they will not do it. The underlying issue could be unprocessed trauma. So, I mean, that is it's something to keep in mind of and consider when we have some of these cases that are really tough and we just cannot understand why somebody is not what we perceive willing to change or willing to move forward. At the same time, we are all experiencing collective trauma in society. This is a human experience. However, people in different facets of society experience collective trauma different. So this is the stress and trauma that are inherent in our society. So probably the biggest one you can think of off the bat is we are currently all living through a global pandemic that causes stress and trauma to everyone, which puts more cognitive load on us, which will impact our stress threshold, whether we overtly recognize it or not. So we're going to talk about next some of the behaviors that you can see come out of a parent who is in a trauma response or who has unresolved trauma. But so we are going to use a tool called Mendemeter. So I'm going to ask everybody to take out your phone or open up a browser window on your computer and go to www.menti.com. And put in code 86991172. And you're going to type in one word that would describe the behavior of a parent that you have seen in court or seen on a visit or worked with, experienced. Think about that behavior when you've worked with someone above threshold. One word to describe what that behavior looks like. And I am going to share the screen here so we can all see. Violent, angry, frantic, disconnected, devastated, frightened. Yeah, these are good ones. Chaotic, hypersensitive, hypersensitive. That's a good one. Yes, that is someone to be aware when you're, especially your tone and your verbal and nonverbal language. Really being mindful of that, because someone in a trauma response is going to be hypersensitive to that. Apathy. Okay, so none of these, maybe excited could be positive, depends how you look at it, but none of these are traditionally what we think of as positive qualities. Okay, these are all behaviors that impact our ability to have relationships with other people, to meet our goals, and essentially for parents who are in the child welfare system to get forward or to move forward and to do what they need to do to get their children back. These are not words that are associated with that. which is unfortunate because every single word on this list is predictable. Given what we know about trauma, given what we know about those chemicals and how they impact the brain and our behavior, every single thing on that list is a physiologically congruent behavior to somebody in a trauma response. So when those of us who work in this system or with a parent, you have to recognize when they walk into a courthouse, that is a very scary environment inherently. They are operating in a system that has taken their children and they do not know what is going to happen. They are meeting a ton of new people, a lot of information, and everybody's saying they want to help, but it doesn't really matter because they took your kid. So by the time you get in front of that judge and you're sitting by your attorneys, especially if it's like shelter care hearing, high stress time, contentious, there is almost no way you're not going to be above threshold. And any person would be. This is an incredibly stressful situation. So it is really not surprising that we see those kind of behaviors come out of parents. So the next part is, so what? And what can we do about it? This is where the idea of self-regulation comes into play. We need someone to be in Bruce Banner mode in order to work with them effectively on behavior change and growth and understanding why they have come to the attention and involvement with the system and why what we are asking them to do is going to help them be a safe parent. For someone to understand all that and be able to function in the system, let alone take on tackling addiction, mental health concerns, navigating poverty, and everything else the families deal with, we need them in Bruce Banner mode. That's what self-regulation helps us do. So self-regulation is what helps bring you down below threshold. This is our ability to modulate our own reactions in order to be able to cope and engage in our environment. This is a skill that is started to develop in the brain since before birth. Self-regulation is necessary for accessing the parts of our brain responsible for executive function. That is where intention for growth and behavior change live, which means, except for cases of imminent threat of harm or death, helping someone become self-regulated should be the foundation of every case. If we are working with a parent who is experiencing those trauma, that unresolved trauma and those trauma responses, which, as we know, is going to be the majority of them. And honestly, we should just assume it is all. Because treating someone in a trauma-informed way is not ever going to hurt someone if they haven't experienced trauma. It is a kinder, more effective way to communicate in general. So working with families, Katie, Bill, and I have kind of put it into 3 different areas where we see self-regulation work and working with families. And that's in meeting basic needs, helping to create trauma responsive spaces and experiences, and skill building. And skill building is, yes, helping parents and children build skills, but equally or more importantly, skill building for yourself to develop self-regulation capabilities, because you cannot help someone self-regulate if you cannot self-regulate. And you can never rely on another human being to be the regulated one. So meeting basic needs. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm sure most of you have probably seen this in some way, shape, or form. This is kind of the pyramid of necessities of human function. So the bottom there is physiological. We need to have our basic physical needs met before we can do anything else. And that is because we need those survival needs to be met, that brainstem, where that brainstem lives. If everything there is not met, it's not going to let you move up to higher function in the brain. So food, water, shelter, safety, basic necessities. We know that a lot of times when people first enter the system, they are navigating poverty. I'm sure have all worked with clients who have experienced homeless or are experiencing homelessness, and or are navigating other systems of poverty and dealing with other barriers. Keep in mind, the number one impact on someone's current stress threshold is the current state of their body at that exact moment. So like this is if somebody, where the word hangry came from. If you're hungry, you get angry. So making sure someone has their basic physical needs met, because we should never ask someone to be calm until they feel safe. So safety is the next level. Safety is emotional safety, physical safety, safety and trust in the system. And that needs to be established. This is where rapport with professionals comes in, with the community. This is where also meeting the basic needs for somebody to feel safe are required. So do not ask someone to regulate, or do not expect it until they feel safe, not because they're a bad parent or a bad person, but because they physiologically cannot. And that's where then once we establish that foundation, that's when we can start going to love and belonging and talking about self-esteem and the future and moving forward and some of those needs. But that physiological and safety need to happen first. So as far as when you're working with families, this is why it's very important to front end load those types of basic needs services at the beginning of a case and to start connecting those families right at the get-go. Because the sooner you can establish that foundation, the sooner then you can help that family move forward. The next part is creating trauma responsive spaces. So a physical environment that is trauma informed or trauma responsive. And trauma responsive means that we are recognizing that the people that we work with in the system have often experienced a significant amount of trauma, and that impacts them to this day and impacts their ability to parent, which is one of the primary reasons they have come into contact with the criminal or with the child welfare system. And that it is our responsibility as that system to do what we can to mitigate the impact of an inherently traumatic experience of the court having to be involved in somebody's family. And part of that is creating spaces that are trauma informed, everything from the color to the lighting to having low sensory environments. When you're working with families, avoid wearing perfumes or colognes or strong scents, making loud sudden sounds, any unnecessary stimuli. Providing sensory objects for both kids and adults that are developmentally appropriate and safe, making sure that there are safe places for both mom and dad, don't leave out dad, they often get left out a lot, to attend the needs of their children, especially during visits. So making sure that, like if you're going to an area with a visit and it's with a dad, does that place have a diaper changing station in the men's bathroom? Because not all places do. So things like that, having areas set up, developmentally appropriate activities, and providing information on community resources and support, including on stress and the impacts of stress. Family engagement. I could talk for days on family engagement from trauma and responsive view, but simple, clear, honest language. It is a skill to develop the balance between trying to help people stay hopeful and being honest, especially when things are not going well. And those are hard conversations to have, but just because they're hard doesn't mean they don't need to happen, because they do. Predictability and consistency with parents, but with enough room for flexibility and compassion. And there again, that's a balance that is learned. We always need to keep in mind that most of the people we're dealing with are navigating poverty, and taking a look at every barrier, every parenting issue, everything from that lens. An active application of compassion. It is hard often to be compassionate to people who maybe in that moment you don't think deserve it. People who are yelling at you, people who are unpleasant, people who are unappreciative, people who are in that trauma response. It is hard to remember that it's not personal. Self-regulation skills are the key to doing that. body-based breaks, especially with people who've experienced have high trauma histories, making sure like meeting times, if they're becoming dysregulated, it's break time, even if it's 5 minutes. And it's a break where you get up and move, because a lot of times people need movement to re-regulate. Having high protein snack foods available. Best recommendation, I learned from Tanya McClanahan in Thurston County, or I always heard from her, people in recovery, high protein snacks every 3 hours is good for brain recovery. So that is what I tell people in general. So courts, having high protein foods available, or as advocates, if you're going to a visit, if you're going to court, you may want to carry some protein bars with you. For anything, it's because that person, if having that need met, may make them a lot easier to work with during a meeting and may make it a lot more effective. Which gets to coping skills toolbox. I carried a coping skills toolbox around with me everywhere when I did family treatment court. Coping skills toolboxes are little kits that you can put together with sensory items and coping skills. That if you're in a situation with a child or parent is becoming dysregulated, you can literally go into your coping skills toolbox. And I will make available these cards. So what I had this printout, I had these individual cards, and then I had little boxes I got from the dollar store and put sensory items and coping skill items in the box. And each participant, when they entered family treatment court, got one. And I also carried one around with me for kids and adults. So we're talking about things like physical sensory items, like worry stones. Anybody can go out and find a rock. Stress balls, scratch and stiff stickers, which I will caution if you are having somebody who is recovering from an addiction where inhalation was a preferred method of drug distribution, do not let them use the scratch and sniff stickers if they don't feel comfortable doing that, or have a discussion with them about it first. Coloring, gum, so that's the taste sense. Bubble wrap, start saving your bubble wrap and just carry around bubble wrap. The sensory, the popping is grounding along with the noise. And if you're working with a family, a really great thing to put in that toolbox is a picture of them and their kids or their kid. Because part of that toolbox is reminding them why they're doing this. And also you can see in there, so recommended for a crisis plan. So I would recommend as advocates, you think about putting together your own coping skills toolbox. A lot of these things you can get at the dollar store, and I'll provide the printout of the cards. And toys. So there are a lot of toys and tools out there that make self-learning, self-regulation fun. Family treatment court, when I was there, we got every family a purble, which looks like this. Here's my purble. What the purble does is if you shake him, he kind of grumbles and he gets upset. And he has a little sensor in him that sounds and feels like a heartbeat. And his heartbeat starts to get really fast the more he gets upset. And if you softly stroke the back of him, you can feel and hear the heartbeat slowly decline. And eventually he starts to purr and falls asleep. This is great for, I use it actually sometimes if I'm in a rough meeting, I'll just pet the purble. But that slow, methodic, rhythmic movement is inherently regulating. So these are great tools for to teach kids to self-regulate and to help them build those skills. Along with Omi the elephant, he's got like 30-second reset and mindfulness activities for kids. Smart watches are great. We also have, so you'll see in the bottom left corner, Tetris. So this is where Tetris comes into play. In order to teach the whole Tetris, in order to teach someone how all the parts fit together, how the world works, how to navigate things, how to put everything together, they need to be in Bruce Banner mode. And Tetris has actually been shown to be an incredibly effective form of mindfulness for people with PTSD. The game of Tetris is very soothing. So the other thing I'll mention that Katie Bell will talk about is equine therapy. or equine assisted support, which I've had the awesome opportunity to be involved with. I'm on their board now for Heart Strides Therapeutic Riding, which does equine assisted support for people in recovery and veterans and other groups, but to teach about that mind-body connection and essentially use a horse as about 1,000 pounds of biofeedback. So that's been incredible to watch. Katie Bell, you want to say anything about any of the toys or purple or anything?
The purple was so fun to receive, I guess. I was going to say try out, but we actually did get one. Dahlia is my daughter. She still uses him or her. And that one is great. We also have tried out the machine on the upper left. Is that a machine?
Oh, yeah, that's MindFlex. That's MindFlex.
Yeah, MindFlex. It's a really, really cool activity. It's yeah, I don't even know how to describe it, but yes.
Yeah, that's kind of one you have to check out to really believe. But these are, and Katie Bell and I made a resource list that's at the end of the PowerPoint with all these on there as well and links to them. So a lot of tools and stuff out there that are fun and both help with self-regulation skills and also help with parent-child bonding. Skill building. So like I mentioned before, skill building is both for use in helping others, but also these are the things that help you build the skills that you use in everyday life to effectively do work with a high trauma, high stress population and very difficult cases and families in very difficult situations. Professionals deal with a lot of vicarious trauma. And much like we advise people with trauma histories to utilize mindfulness skills to cope, it's not because they are trauma survivors, it's because they are human. So all the skills, everything we talk about today, they're not just for people who've experienced trauma. These are for everyone. These are ways to live better and to see the world differently and to be able to do the work that you want to do and not let it burn you out. And to still be able to do it and have satisfaction out of it. And to not let that vicarious trauma impact your stress threshold and your health and your wellness. Because we want to maintain and retain good people in this field. So the stronger your self-regulation skills are, the lot easier it is to stay to work in this field, and the more effective you're going to be. So if you saw the word mindfulness on the screen and you started to zone out, I need you to come back to us right now and forget everything you thought you knew about the word. Mindfulness gets a bad rap. I don't really know why it gets a rap as kind of this new age abstract concept. And it does come from traditional ancient practices, but there is hundreds of years of proven research on the benefits of mindfulness. In my view, mindfulness is probably one of the greatest health advances of our time. And I think in the future, we will look at it as kind of like Adkins for the brain, like this great revolutionary thing for our health. The areas that we are going to cover are breathing, grounding, awareness, visualization, movement, and creative exercise. We chose to cover those areas in that order because it is very based out of mindfulness-based stress reduction theory and builds on one another. This is actually, and what you're going to see today is based off a curriculum that I had started to develop for Family Treatment Court with the parents during COVID, where they got to do weekly activities in each one of these areas and report back on them. So we're gonna talk about each one of those areas, and we're gonna, for how much of time we're able to, practice whatever we can. And all of those skills are meant to increase mindfulness. And I am going to start our video here with just a short little, this is my favorite description that I found of what mindfulness is. It's very short. So it's going to play. So I got to make sure my sound is shared here.
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. So I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribed for you. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower, and one that is accessible by you immediately.
Okay, so mindfulness is what allows us to remain compassionate and composed in high conflict situations, because there is a cost to kindness. Like I mentioned before, it is hard to remain regulated when our own threat response is being triggered. So when I talk about the cost of kindness, it's taking that time and energy and capacity to stop and cognitively recognize what is happening, apply that empathy, and respond appropriately takes energy and time and those skills to be maintained. There is a cost to it. It is a lot easier to just act out of impulse and how we want to, but we know that that has consequences when we do that. So when we're talking about working with parents, what I oftentimes hear with people is it worth it? And to which my response is absolutely, it's worth it. And you're not going to get every parent. Making that extra effort isn't going to matter every time. But for people like Katie Bell, it made the world of difference. It mattered for the course of her entire life. And you never know what person you work with, it's going to matter. So why not try to do it with everyone? So I'm going to hand it over to Katie Bell, who's just going to talk a little bit about her experience with mindfulness and how it's played into her recovery.
Hello again. When I started family treatment court, I felt so very overwhelmed and extremely alone. Like I said, I had really lost almost everything, and really felt like there was no coming back from it. I, knew I had several choices, which every person has. I could just just give up and go ahead and drink and just say, oh, there goes another kid, hopefully, somebody will care about her. Because I think that kind of the tipping point was for me was when her dad passed away. I realized that it really was up to me. So whatever I decided to do would be her future and my future. And I think one of the big differences about my experience with my son, which, like I said, was 12 years ago now, and my experience with my daughter, which was several now, now 2-ish years ago, was the difference in the way that I was treated, because I wasn't treated well at all with when this all went down with my son. It was in King County, and I had zero clue, of course, what I was doing. I had zero clue again this time, but I wasn't given any sort of support or hope or confidence that it would come around in a way that would make me or my son better off. And my experience with coming into, we call the FRC, Family Recovery Court, was, the first person that I encountered was, well, after the shelter hearing, which was not, it was a terrible experience, terrible. But the next person I encountered was my attorney, who just, despite what she hears every day, she still treated me with kindness. And, I remember being in her office, and I looked over and she had a picture of her 3 little children on her desk. And I just, it occurred to me that, hold on, Dal, my daughter just walked in the door. Dahlia, honey, I'm on the phone. It's okay. It occurred to me that that she is a mom, and she, hears these things that she, has chosen as a career to hear, but it still can't be easy for her in her being a mom, trying to weigh it in with being a professional. So she was fabulous. And then the next, we talked about getting into this recovery court thing, and I weighed it. I wasn't sure if it was, the right decision, because, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what any of the lingo was. I didn't know, I didn't have a very favorable outcome of what could happen. I just, from my past experience, I wasn't really confident in even that anything would happen. I pictured a lifetime of drinking without any child, either child. I just assumed that would happen. But the next person I encountered, because my attorney convinced me to go talk to this coordinator, was Laura. And just the way that she welcomed me, there was no judgment. I didn't feel it was a very, very, she treated me like a person, and I hadn't been treated like that in my prior experience. And the hole I had drunk myself into, pretty much, I didn't feel good about myself. My self-esteem was gone. Any people who had believed in me before no longer really did, just because of that's what we do. We burn our bridges and sabotage ourselves and our futures and our presents and our, all that good stuff. So anyway, so I finally went into court and really didn't trust the process. As Laura said earlier, I didn't feel safe. Thankfully I did have an apartment that I had just moved into a couple of months before all of this went, the stuff happened. So I did have that going for me, which is more than a lot of people do, but I still, I was broke. I couldn't afford to do laundry. It was a horrible time in my life, the worst I have ever had. And then my daughter's gone. So anyway, it was a good, I came into court and I wasn't trusting. But as uh, I stayed there, and I was assigned what we call a CASA. He was amazing. He really, 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 really was supportive and kind person and kind hearted. And again, he treated me like a person. And uh, I was thinking when Laura was talking about Bruce Banner and Hulk, I was probably worse than the Hulk because I pretended to be Bruce Banner when inside I felt like the Hulk. So I was like thinking I was fooling everyone because I just wanted my daughter back. And I just, okay, everyone, I'll do what you say. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, sure. This is not, I don't know if this will work, and who knows. And so the court held me accountable. My daughter was in foster care for about 8 months, which was way longer than I thought she would be. But there was a point, with that I realized why that was. And it was uh, when I had an epiphany one day when I was doing my homework for treatment, when she was gone. And of course, all I wanted was to be home. And I remember sitting there doing my homework outside on my little patio and thinking, finally, it was just this light bulb moment where I just realized what the purpose of all of these requirements and what the reason for the whole system is. And it was so I could get my life together and build these techniques that could actually I could learn to keep myself regulated, which I didn't even know I needed to be regulated. I didn't realize that I wasn't regulated. So it's just been a really cool journey. And like all of this mindfulness stuff, it's so weird because I'll chat with Laura sometimes and I'll just be like, oh my gosh, guess what happened today? And it'll just like poof. And she'll be like, Katie Bell, what is that? And I'll say, it's mindfulness. And it's funny how it all comes together. And it's really created a good life for us. And I know, we have a good future. And so, yeah.
How important do you think mindfulness is? Because this is the first time in a long time you've been able to maintain a significant long period that you've been in long-term recovery, really, for decades.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
How instrumental has mindfulness been to that?
Oh, I think it's pretty much a core, it's at the core of it. I mean, I don't think I've seen that video you showed, and it's just amazing how different it is to be able to step outside of the situation and really analyze what is the reality of this, what is happening right now, rather than the knee-jerk reaction of, go off on whoever for whatever reason, or slowly go home and drink my resentments away and be angry, go home and be angry because somebody did this, and then say, I'll show you, I'm gonna drink. It's silly, it really is. And it's cool to be able to just kind of make a self-analysis without judgment, and all of the lists that you showed, it really, it's just amazing that like the physiological changes and just the calm, the peace I feel now, rather than all those words, all the bad stuff are gone.
All those words.
Yeah. I mean, all those words that everybody listed in the beginning, I remember feeling every one of those things, you know, and my word was devastated. That was my word. But, you know, that's because I was in that position. But as I read all those words, I was like, I felt every one of those, you know, even though I didn't show it. I pretended to be Bruce Banner.
Yep. Yep. Because you had done that your whole life. That had been your coping skill with stress. That was your trauma response, that people pleasing.
Yep. That's what I've learned. That's the only thing I've learned. So it's just cool to have the opportunity to learn those things. And, you know, one of the things when you were talking about the I guess, the people in the CASAs or what are they? I don't know what they're called now, but I was thinking about who my CASA was. And I was thinking he has all of those, you know, he has that self-regulation. He's calm and he's kind and he doesn't take it personally. You know, there were times where, you know, I wasn't real happy with a lot of things, and I never
remember.
But but I didn't actually go off on anybody in particular. I exploded once. You know, well, I didn't explode actually. I looked like I was going to explode, and I somewhat did, but I didn't. So, but yeah, the CASA that I was, you know, he really has a lot of those skills, and I think that is why I had a lot of trust in him. And you know, he helped regulate me, you know, just because I wasn't nervous for him to come over. I was like, okay, the house is not perfect, but he isn't going to come and look judgy at me, and he's going to be nice, and he's going to ask if I, you know, how things have been, if I need it. You know, it was always, he was a joy to receive. So
I love it. And that is not something that you hear often.
No.
For professionals. So awesome. Thank you, Katie Bell. That was beautiful. So let's practice. Let's learn some practice. So like I said, this is based off of curriculum that we made for family treatment court participants. We are going to start with breathing. Breathing is the place to start, because breathing is our one thing we have conscious control over to impact our autonomic nervous system's response to stress. So breathing is our connection between the conscious and unconscious. It's in order to maintain control over that mind-body connection. So most people are like, breathing, really? But breathing, when I did this curriculum, was the largest section, because most people do not breathe correctly. The vast majority of people above the age of it's about a year breathing correctly. Next time you see a little baby, look how they breathe. That is how we are born breathing. We breathe into our stomachs. We breathe into our diaphragm, which is the muscle under our lungs. That is how the human body wants to breathe. It is when we start to experience stress and the stress response that we move our breathing into our chest, because that's where we can get short, shallow breaths in order to, you know, quickly oxygenate our blood for that fight, flight, or freeze response. Where I started my recovery, and before I even got into mindfulness, before I even got into meditation, was paced breathing, which I will demonstrate next. It is a tactic that comes out of the military, originally developed for snipers. So one of the most common breathing exercises is 4-7-8. So it is taking in 4 breaths, holding it for 7 counts, and then exhaling for 8. And it is that full exhale on the 8, that long exhale, that really triggers your parasympathetic nervous system response. So next time it gets around to the 4, everybody feel free, get comfortable in your seat, sit up straight, uncross your legs, and you're going to take deep breaths in through your mouth, and you're going to in through your nose, exhale through your mouth. Breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold for 7. And out for 8. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 7. and out for 8. Okay. Grounding. Grounding is kind of the next level. This is where your coping skills toolbox is going to come in and very handy. Coping or grounding are very quick body-based techniques that force your brainstem to kind of come into the, oh, and Pat, we're not going to talk about Qigong. These guys did it, though. We are going to talk, well, I'll show you a little bit of Tai Chi, which is similar, but we do have a link for Qigong too. Grounding very sensory based on your 5 senses to bring you into the present moment. These are things that do not require cognitive skills. Like I said, very quick, easy, effective. So we are right now, just look around you. And this is, you know, if you want to bring somebody back into the present moment, you're working with a parent, a kid, do this. One thing you can see, one thing you can touch, one thing you can hear, one thing you can taste, one thing you can smell, even if it's the air. You know, it's whatever. It just having to have your brain in that environment forces it to switch function. Okay, we're going to skip Mendemeter. Awareness. The next level is focused awareness. And this really centers around the idea of developing skills around interoception, which is our sense of the internal state of our bodies. And we all have that, whether you recognize it or not. And that's the mind-body connection, strengthening that. And awareness is what allows us to do what Katie Bill kind of talked about, is that outside observer. When something stressful or something happens and we have to react, the skills to bring yourself outside of that and look at it rationally and then make a decision. So we're acting out of choice and intentionality rather than impulse. And then that's where we can distinguish between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable in life. You know, when I say pain, it's barriers, it's, you know, anything bad that happens. Bad stuff happens all the time, big to bad or big to small. Pain is different than suffering. This one is especially important to me because I suffer with a chronic illness. Even though it does not look like it, I spend every day in some level of pain and discomfort. If you want to know what it's like to live in my body unmedicated, you can not eat for 24 hours, not sleep for 24 hours, and then go into 110-degree sauna and see how long you can stand upright. And physiologically, that'd be about equivalent. So we are all going to experience pain. It is our choice whether or not to suffer. And it is through those mindfulness skills and control over our mind and our body that we can achieve that. And that is a lot. If you're not looking to prevent suffering and to escape suffering, then you're not getting into a lot of those very negative, potentially lifelong bad habits or things like addiction. Katie Bill, anything you want to say? I know this is all these, especially the last two, are personal to you as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, I've kind of learned that, like you said, everything is a choice. I ran into a man actually earlier this week that he said the coolest thing to me, and it was, what you think about is what you attract. And it was just in the line at Safeway, and he was behind me and he said something really nice to the cashier. And I said, oh, that's really nice. And then he just said, remember, what you think about is what you attract. And I just thought, and I thought about it all day. You know, I thought, he's so right. If I think about alcohol, guess what I'm going to do? If I think about sadness, guess what? I'm going to be sad. If I think about joy, you know, it's, you know, like you said, pain is everywhere, and we're so out of control of so many things in life. But, you know, I feel so lucky to have been an alcoholic, to be honest. I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have gone through some of the struggles I've gone through. I wouldn't feel as grateful as I feel. You know, life would be different, and I don't want it to be different. So, you know, I choose to be happy.
Which is amazing. But it took you a long time to get there, right? And it
Yeah.
took that awareness.
Yes,
Yeah, that was
absolutely.
impossible, even how to get there. You had to have that foundation first before you could even come close to having that realization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to invite you all now. We're going to do a little mini activity called a body scan. And this is to call awareness to the different areas of your body. So feel free, get comfortable in your chair, sit up straight so you're comfortable, close your eyes, take a deep breath. Exhale. Okay, so try not to focus on anything that might distract you. First, take a couple moments and just notice your breathing. On your next inward breath, imagine the air going into your body, down into your chest, abdomen, legs, and landing on your feet. Keep breathing and notice your feet. If they are tense, relax them. Try to imagine your bones easing. And now moving up again through your ankles, calves, and thighs. Did you notice tightness anywhere? Check around as you focus on this part of your body. Try to loosen whatever might be there. And keep breathing. Moving up your body into your pelvic area and abdomen. What do you notice? Maybe your abdomen is being held in. Let it go. Imagine your muscles becoming heavy and easy. Keep breathing as you go. Imagine giving air to the parts of you that are tense. And now moving to your chest and shoulders. Are your shoulders slumped or raised? Breathe in and let them go. Notice your arms and let them fall. Imagine the tension just melting away. And moving up to your neck, notice what stress or tightness might be there. Move your neck around slowly if you wish to release and let go and breathe. And now onto your face muscles and head. Imagine all the muscles in your face loosening, your jawbone releasing, and your head relaxing. Let go of any thoughts that might be making your head feel unsettled. Take a few more breaths in and out. On the next outward breath, imagine all the stress leaving your body. You can open your eyes and come back to the present. Okay, so that was an example of just a very short body scan activity, drawing your attention to different parts of your body. Next is visualization. And Katie Bell talked a little bit about visualization when she talked about, what you think about, you attract. So that requires your focused attention, and it requires you to think creatively about what you want, which strengthens the pathways in your brain between your goal and the pathways to get to the goal. So we're not going to do the tree activity, which is why there on your slideshow, if you click be a tree, it will send you, that's a link directly to the YouTube video. But because this just was not going to fit in time-wise, no matter which one I could find. So the grounding or the visualization activity we had is either for kids or adults. It's about being grounded like a tree. And that seems to be kind of the most popular one among people. Movement. So the primary purpose of movement when it comes to mindfulness is not exercise. Exercise is a secondary benefit, but the primary purpose is to notice the sensations in the body and to regulate. Some people, especially people who really struggle with attention or hyperactivity, and struggle with, the traditional form of meditation and just sitting, which tangent-wise is not what meditation is solely, really do well with mindful movement. and need that movement to regulate, need that rhythm. What's great about that is it's adaptable for people based on limitation, and it has a ton of applications in parenting. I think the most popular thing I ever posted when I was in family treatment court was freeze yoga for people to do with their kids. Here again, we had a Tai Chi activity picked out, which is a mindful movement activity. So on the PowerPoint, if you click that link, it will bring you right to a very introductory Tai Chi activity to get you an idea of what that practice looks like. Then creative exercise. This is probably the parents' most favorite one. Creative exercise is, the creation of really anything that's considered art or creative endeavor of any kind, whether it's painting, drawing, building, gardening, cooking, whatever, anything can be a creative exercise. The goal is to get into that state of what's called flow, which is where the person is performing an activity and they're fully immersed and energized and involved and enjoying that activity. It's a very specific state, and it is a very healing place for your brain to be in. There's also a very inherent satisfaction of creating and adding to the world. And unlike other forms of mindfulness, creative exercise has the unique benefit of strengthening cognitive ability for problem solving, which makes it especially beneficial. So we won't do draw your breath, but this is an incredibly easy activity to do with kids or adults. You can do it virtually, in person. Even if they don't have pen and paper, just have them do it with their finger. And every time they inhale, it's up. Every time downhale, it's down. And that is just very, forming the very basic foundations between mind and body connection, connecting breath with conscious attention. So we put together a list of a lot more activities in each one of these areas for you to try. So I encourage you to check those out. And we also put together a list of books, videos, apps, technology, and some online learning opportunities that Katie and Allie have found beneficial. The Purple's on there, Omi the Elephant's on there, and Heart Math. I would highly recommend people check out heartmath.com. That's an excellent one. We have about 1 minute left. And so I'm going to ask you to take the last 1 minute and go into Mendemeter and put in one new takeaway or idea for how some new way or idea you had, something that struck you on some way you could improve or do better in your interactions with families, or something you'd like to try with families. And put that into Mendemeter. Okay, I will leave the instructions up there on the screen. Oh, no, I won't, just kidding. I'm gonna go back here. So I guess Katie Bell and breathing, good. Okay, we will finish up for today with our thank yous. So thank you everybody for attending. People put stuff into Mendemeter. We hope that you found this beneficial. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or Katie Bell. Our contact information was on the first page. And Ryan, I will, if you don't have them already, if you didn't get them off the chat, I will make sure you have the PowerPoint slides. And again, thank you for having us. If anybody does have any questions and wants to stay on, Katie Bell and I will be on for a couple minutes. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have a very calm, peaceful rest of your afternoon.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, and thank you, Katie Bell. Oh, I'd never forgotten to thank you. Katie Bell, your experience and your willingness to share makes this what it is, and we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for people who are inspirational and we're willing to share like you. So thank you.
I just appreciate everything that, it's funny because I honestly, everybody says, well, you could you would have done this without us. And I really don't know if I could have. I mean, just without the support, because it really meant everything, you know,
You
like
could have made it through. Do you think that you would still be sober?
yes. Right. I mean, you know, even the UAs, as awful as they are, it, you know, once the worst days that you feel like you can't stay sober, you're like, oh, tomorrow the UA, I better stay sober.
Good. That's how it should feel.
I know. It's funny. And it's funny once we realize, I mean, once I realized how necessary it all is. So
Yeah.
yep. Are we